Well, welcome everybody. We are so delighted to have all of you with us here today for a town hall with Congressman Earl Blumenauer. I am Jules Bailey. I am the Oregon League of Conservation Board Chair. My pronouns are he, him. And as we get started, I'd like to first acknowledge that the Oregon League of Conservation Voters works to protect people and places on the ancestral lands of Indigenous communities who built homes, economies, and trading routes across the land we now call Oregon. We'd like to honor and acknowledge Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. The Klamath tribe of the Southern Oregon Plateau, the Burns Paiute of the High Desert East, the Coquille of Southern Oregon's coastal forests, the Confederated tribes of Grand Ronde in the Northern Coast Range, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua in the Southern Oregon foothills, the Confederated tribes of Umatilla in the Blue Mountains, the Confederated tribes of Siletz in Oregon's northern rainforests, the Confederated tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw on the windblown southern coast, and the Confederated tribes of Warm Springs on the sunny eastern slopes of the Oregon Coast Cascades. And we would like to recognize all the other Indigenous communities who have not been federally recognized. And it is my immense pleasure to introduce here today for our town hall, someone who honestly probably needs no introduction, but that is Congressman Earl Blumenauer. You probably know him as an incredible climate and environmental champion who's been a rock solid fixture of Oregon's political leadership for a long time as a state legislator, as a Multnomah County commissioner, as a Portland city councilor, and since 1996 in the House of Representatives with a lifetime League of Conservation score of 96%. So top that. He's on the House Ways and Means Committee. He's the chair of the subcommittee on trade. And of course, we all know him for his work on bikes. He's the founder of the Congressional Bike Caucus, and he's also a member of the Progressive Caucus as well. And near and dear to my heart, and to make us both feel a little bit old, it's been exactly 20 years since I first organized a panel at Lewis and Clark College as a senior featuring Congressman Earl Blumenauer and the Oregon League of Conservation Voters executive director at that time, Jonathan Poisner. And so he has been hard at work for many, many decades on leading for a strong and healthy environment for Oregon. So Congressman Earl Blumenauer, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any opening remarks, we would love to hear them.
Well, great. Thank you, Jules. I don't recall your beard being quite that gray back then.
I just color it now.
But, well, it's a small price for the amazing advocacy that you've demonstrated. I appreciate having a chance to work with you on a number of activities, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. There's been so much going on in Washington, D.C. at this point. We spent, I want to say, like 46 hours in markup and Ways and Means, dealing with the reconciliation package. We'll touch on a number of these things, but just let me say that this is unprecedented. I've never seen an opportunity like this in all my years of public service, dating back to when I was a college student at Lewis and Clark College. This is an amazing opportunity for us. And in no small measure, it's because of voices like yours that have been amplified in Oregon and around the country that has put us in this position. We have an administration that is committed, unlike no other administration in our history, on being able to have a low carbon future, to build back better, to deal with some of the historic inequities that we're challenging. But most of all, understanding the climate crisis we face and a willingness to make monumental investments. I'm excited about what we have before us. I look forward to the conversation, your questions, your comments. But let me just say that this is decidedly a work in progress. While I'm excited about a number of the elements that are in this package, bills that I've been working on for years, like ending fossil fuel subsidies, but there's a lot that's going to be done in the course of the next probably 2 or 3 months. This is a fluid situation. It is a work in progress. And the more that we work together to focus on what we care about, the better off we were going to be. So why don't I stop at this point? I look forward to having an opportunity to discuss items on your agenda.
Thank you, Congressman. And I know we are absolutely thrilled that you are at the center of this discussion, given your long experience and commitment to climate, to be able to shape something that will be the best possible a moment for us to seize this opportunity. Could you talk just briefly about some of the key pieces of climate infrastructure that are in this bill, and give us an update on the status in Washington right now?
Well, the proposal that we have before us has a wide variety of items that were in the Green Act. For instance, in terms of extending at 10 years the tax credits for both solar and wind, and extending it to transmission issues and geothermal. I mean, it is a remarkable effort, and it is the broadest one that we have seen today. It includes something that I have been working on actually back with the Obama administration and their American Recovery Act, direct pay for those tax credits. To make sure that we reduce the friction and the money that's lost, and be able to get more bang for the tax credit dollar. We have the issue that I've been working on in terms of the Superfund tax, something that has just driven me crazy, that the Republicans refused to extend the modest fees on the petrochemical industry to clean up the toxic legacy they have left scattered all across the country. It's something we've been battling on, and the legislation that we're advancing reinstates that Superfund tax and dedicates it to a fund to be able to help deal with the toxic legacy. We've got some in Oregon, right here in the Willamette River Basin. We've got a toxic legacy of in part the federal government that built and decommissioned battleships for 3 wars. We've got an obligation to continue following through on that, and having the Superfund tax will make it easier to be able to make progress. In any event, there's a wide array of them. We can touch on some, but the point is, I have to conclude by pointing out our success in cycling. I had a Bike Commuter Act that the Republicans gratuitously repealed with their strange tax plan of 4 years ago. Well, we have it reinstated, we have improved it and expanded it. We've also got a tax credit for e-bikes. And dealing with other alternative fuel vehicles. I'm excited that these are items that I hope we'll be able to get across the finish line, and will make a big difference to my fellow Oregonians.
The person who rides a bike, thank you. I want to turn it over to Sean Howie for our first attendee question. Sean, are we able to have Sean front and center here? Oh, I get another.
Hi, it took a second just to get it clicked over here.
Great.
Well, yeah, I just had one question. Since it's well documented that fossil fuel companies profit at record levels, is there any work being done to eliminate or reduce those subsidies for fossil fuel producers?
Great point. And as you may know, Sean, this is legislation I have been pursuing for years. I still think that there's room in this reconciliation package to be able to even the playing field. Part of what we've done with the Superfund tax on the petrochemical industry helps lower that playing field, even that playing field a little bit, reduce the benefit, but by no means is it enough. make no mistake, this is very, very contentious. And this is going to be a package that's going to be hard to enact. As you know, Republicans and Democrats are very evenly split. It's 50-50 in the Senate, and that includes Manchin. And there's only a 3-vote margin in the House. This has been a heavy lift. I was disappointed that it wasn't in this iteration, but I've not stopped because I think it makes sense. There's more evidence out today about the health impacts of fossil fuel emissions that impacts the lives of millions of Americans. So we need to stop the unnecessary subsidization. We'll continue working in this as we get into the home stretch here. And that's an area where people can help. People amplify their voices and have other networks across the country. I would hope that anybody that's got involved with fraternities or sororities that have outposts in Texas, in particular, people who have extended families, people who have business and professional contacts, to be able to beat that drum. We need to keep the pressure on, and we really would appreciate your help in other parts of the country. It's not a problem with at least the Democrats in the Oregon delegation, and with Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden. Actually, this provision of my bill got in the Senate version of reconciliation. But we've got our work cut out for us in other parts of the country, and we would really appreciate help.
Thank you so much for your response.
Thank you, Congressman. Clark Brockman, you have the next question.
Hello.
Hi.
Takes a minute to come through. Congressman Blumenauer, it's good to see you again. My name is Clark Brockman. My pronouns are he, him, and I live in the Alberta just neighborhood in Portland. I'm a principal at Sarah Architects, where my focus is reducing the climate impacts of the built environment. First, Congressman Blumenauer, I'd like to thank you for your long and steady leadership on climate issues in Congress. It's truly appreciated. As a sustainability-focused architect, I have many detailed questions I would love to ask you about the Build Back Better Act, but the one that jumps to the top for me is actually political.
Maybe
What is the best?
I was just going to say, maybe when it's a little safer in COVID terms, we might be able to have another one of those roundtables at your firm to be able to dive into these further. I've really appreciated the partnership with ZGF over the years.
Oh, actually, I am at Sarah Architects, but absolutely. But yeah, we've had you in. So what is the best way for those of us in yours and other liberal districts in Oregon to most effectively advocate to the US House and Senate on this act? I don't want to flood your office or those of our sympathetic senators that you just mentioned with calls and letters when it seems that we need to be applying pressure to swing representatives and senators to get as many of them as possible on board. Thanks for taking my question.
Yeah, oh, you're great. I apologize for the mix-up. I was given a different note. It's hard for me to keep track of all the.
Not a problem. CGF is doing some amazing work for the environment as well. And I have a bunch of colleagues there.
It's hard to keep track of all the progressive architects in Oregon. You folks have had an outside influence in terms of being able to deal with sustainability, careful design, environmental sensitivity, and proving that it's good business and it's good for the environment. I appreciate the way that you frame that, because sometimes it's really frustrating because we have a lot of people who call and thank us for what we're already doing. It takes time from our staff, from me, and I try and make clear, I don't need to be thanked for what we're already doing. What we would like is to have more assistance amplifying these messages. The way that you and your colleagues and other people who share these sensitivities can be able to highlight what difference they make to you and your vision of the future, and be able to connect with others, be able to make it real in terms of what difference it makes in terms of building design, in terms of land use is one of the most important things we can do dealing with climate change. And people in the design community have special expertise to be able to document what difference it makes. And again, what I said, I'm very impressed that you've been able to show that it is good business. It's good business not to waste energy, not to waste water, to be able to give employees and companies a setting that enables them to act on their values. Being able to transmit that message to other people with the sort of intensity and authenticity that you have. We need to make this real. I would think after what we've all experienced here this last 6 months in terms of our own climate crisis, what happened in June, I found that telling people about what we experienced with our heat dome, 3 successive days of all-time high record temperatures, culminating on the 28th of June at 116 degrees, giving people a sense that this costs hundreds of lives. It's disrupting crops, it disrupts neighborhood activity, and it's going to take a full court press to respond to it. Being able to share our experience and our recommendations, I think, makes a big difference, helping make this real to people. One of the things I'm working on now is sort of a response to the natural disasters. The climate-induced natural disasters that we've seen, the flooding, the heat. It seems like we've got 1/3 of the country that's on fire, 1/3 of the country that's underwater, and 1/3 of the country that doesn't have any water at all. Being able to help people understand the real implications and our lived experience in terms of what difference it makes, I think this is compelling. And I think each of us have a role with our various contacts, relatives, friends, business associates who are out there who may be sympathetic to messages from us, but really haven't taken it to heart. And that's, I think, the single most important thing that any of us can do is to make this real for people that we have some credibility with.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Question, Clark. All right, Cassie Wilson, you're up next.
Hi, Congressman Blumenauer. My name is Cassie Wilson. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm 23 years old and I live in Boring. I'm a member of Sunrise PDX as well as Clackamas County's Youth Advisory Task Force on Climate. You've already spoken about this a little bit, but as we know, transportation justice and climate justice very much go hand in hand, especially with 40% of our state's emissions coming from transportation. And it's kind of ironic to be asking you this question from my car, but I was wondering if there's anything being done at the federal level to push for deeper investments in expanded and improved transit, bike, ped infrastructure instead of the currently proposed freeway expansions all over the Portland metro area.
Cassie, thank you for your question. I am very pleased with the work, starting with the Biden administration, where there was environmental justice factored into transportation. There were provisions to reconnect neighborhoods. For example, one of our alternatives in terms of dealing with the Rose Quarter, having money that would be available to repair a historic scar on our community and the injustice to people of color, particularly the African-American community. That's an important program that the Biden administration is committed to. Chairman DeFazio tried to put a very aggressive program together. He didn't quite get the cooperation he wanted. So he's gone ahead with his reconciliation package. I was just on the phone with him a little while ago, where they are beefing these elements up. There's money for dealing with economic justice. There's transit. I have in this package legislation I mentioned in terms of the commuter bike benefit. We set this benefit at 30% of what the federal government gives to people who drive to work. So it's almost $90 a month that they would be able to spend on bike commuting. We expand commuter choice with scooters, with bike share. We've been engaged in a tax credit for e-bikes. The e-bike, and I must admit, for a while I was a little skeptical. I'd rather burn fossil fuels than the electric bike. And then I spent some time riding it, and I watched what happened, how it transformed the commuting experience for a number of people. You don't have to put it on, the full power boost mode, but being able to use it if, for example, your commute going home is uphill, and it expands the range of people who can take advantage of the cycling experience, because not everybody has the ability to physically, but an e-bike makes everybody a bike commuter. So we've got a number of these provisions that I'm really excited about. We have resources to expand electrical vehicle charging stations. We're busy working on electrification of the transportation system. But you can have all the electric vehicles and bikes you want, but if you can't charge them, let's just say they're of limited utility. So we're hard at work with the tax credits, more for the electric infrastructure. And I was excited that I didn't have any resistance, at least from the Democrats, on the Ways and Means Committee doing this. And they stand a very good chance of being retained in the reconciliation package, despite efforts that I thought were bizarre of some of my Republican friends to target the work for cycling and e-bikes. I just thought it was bizarre. And I don't think it's very good politics.
All right, thank you, Cassie. We appreciate it. Next up, we have Dr. Jim Gaudino.
Hi, can you see me?
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jules and Congressman, and much appreciation to your fabulous work for Oregonians and our district. I'm a preventive medicine, public health physician specialist affiliated with OHSU. And it's as we've talked about, the climate situation is an all hands on deck issue. So let me ask this question. State and local public health departments are needed, as we've learned from, are desperately needed, as we've learned from the response to COVID, but so under resourced, underinvested for many years. But they also have the expertise to serve in communities in planning, mobilizing, implementing interventions to prevent and mitigate greenhouse gas related health impacts and disaster work, but they're not funded to do so. Will you work to add specific funding for the public health infrastructure to address community climate-related concerns in Oregon communities. And thank you so much.
It's a great observation and question, Doctor, and I appreciate it. This has been one of our challenges, as you mentioned, as we're trying to deal with the COVID crisis. Public health is so essential, and it's sad that it has been undercut time after time. So that's been part of what we've done with legislation already, pumping money to try and reinforce that. There's, I think, a range of opportunities. I'm working, I think I mentioned a moment ago, dealing with what we do with disaster. We're watching now across the country climate-related disaster activities, people drowning in subways, being swept away, the challenges in terms, well, just how do we plan for disasters, and having good, thoughtful work with people who are involved with public health and land use planning. There were, 100 people drowned trying to escape from Hurricane Rita. I mean, this is fundamental to community health. And I think there is a role to play incorporating in all of these climate-related and disaster recovery, focusing on the public health. Part of what we are working on now is to beef up the investment in the Affordable Care Act, to extend that to people who live in red states where Republican governors and legislatures refuse to take what is essentially almost free money to be able to provide those needed services. And that would make a big difference, boosting the public health reaction. And we're at risk of losing rural hospitals. We have the resources stretched to the limit in our big cities, and making sure that there are the resources, particularly for the public health advocates. One other area that we've been working on with AOC is a Civilian Climate Corps Jobs and Justice Act that would have resources to help people on the ground and be able to equip, motivate, and finance, particularly young people who want to be full participants. Your point about public health is one with which I could not agree more. I started earlier in my career. I spent a lot of time as a Multnomah County Commissioner and saw the counties, particularly Multnomah County, as the healthcare provider of last resort. Jules can cite you chapter and verse on that. And they don't get the support and the respect they need. And we pay the price. And we're seeing it with the COVID crisis right now.
Thank you so much. And please work towards this. We have a tremendous workforce, and we'd love to actually train those civilian workers too.
Indeed.
Great offer, and thanks for the great answer, Congressman. Next up, we have Robin Harkless.
Hello, Congressman. Good to see you. Really appreciate all the comments shared so far today. I go by she, her pronouns, by the way, and I work for the National Policy Consensus Center. We're housed at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. And my question is related to how kind of federal climate action initiatives and policies support state action, particularly in the realms of fire and forestry.
Oh, where do I start? I mentioned that we're doing some work now dealing with disaster, how we prevent it, how we recover, and then how we move forward, making us in a stronger position. And there's nothing that I think is more critical based on what we have seen. I mentioned that it looked like a third of the country was on fire. What's happening with our forest practices? In part, we've had 100 years of stupid forestry policy, suppression of all forest fires, undercutting the natural action in terms of forest health, the land uses. You know, one of the things that just drives me crazy is that the urban-rural interface up in the flame zone is the area of most rapid residential development in the country. Well, wait a minute. Putting residential properties in places where they really don't belong, it increases dramatically the cost of fighting fires. We spend time and money trying to protect residences that shouldn't be there. It's a danger to the firefighters, and it is a distraction in terms of trying to deal with fire management. People who live in the inner urban interface start a lot of fires, you know, backyard barbecues or lawnmowers or whatever it is. I think this is something that I feel very, very strongly about, that we need to start with a reset. We also need, in terms of our recovery from natural disasters, whether they're floods, forest fires, being able to use the natural healing power of forest health, of grasslands, allowing the resilience of nature to be able to keep moisture, to be able to fight against wildfires that plague us, to be able to, in terms of coastal erosion. I mean, I'm getting a little far afield, but it ties into a common theme that I have, and that is we ought to be using the power of nature to not only prevent the disasters, but to be able to heal. Understanding forest health, restricting dangerous forestry practices, being able to restore natural forests, not monoculture, you know, that we saw in the Pacific Northwest in the, I still remember people from Weyerhaeuser putting me on a helicopter and showing me all the great work they were doing with areas that had been clear cut. And they're planting little tree crops that are identically spaced, that are more susceptible to disease, to insects, and to fire, and more erosion. A natural forest is much more resilient. And I think it's important for us to do that. Land use is one of the most important things we can do to fight against climate change. I'm spending time, actually my next meeting is dealing with legislation that I have to enforce prohibitions against reckless forest practices where they're clearing native forests and replacing it with, you know, palm oil, soy cultivation. These are things that make us less resilient and less healthy. So, I mean, too long an answer, but you push my button, because I feel very, very strongly that this is something that we have learned slowly and painfully, that we've got to change forest practices. We've got to fight for land use that protects the forest base and the grasslands that add to that resilience and that health of our natural ecosystems.
Thank you so much. Happy to push your buttons.
I look forward to working with you to be able to advance this, because we've got great opportunities here in Oregon. We've got environmental groups, nature conservatives. I mean, there's just so many people who understand these principles, and not the least of which is OLCV.
Thank you.
I can speak for all of us when I say I'm glad you have those buttons to be pushed, that you get so passionate about this. Andrew Crosby, you're up next. All right, we'll see if Andrew can join us after our next one. Patricia Sanders, you're up.
Hello, Congressman.
Howdy.
My name is Pat Sanders. I live in the Montevilla neighborhood of Portland. And my question has to do with the electric car fleet that is being encouraged by President Biden. Excuse me. My concern is the additional load this will put on the electrical grid, which I think is already somewhat overwhelmed and inadequate. And I wonder if there are any plans in place for trying to increase the capacity of the electrical grid.
That's a very important point. Your reference to Montevilla brings a smile to my face. I spent 5 years at the Montevilla Neighborhood Library when I went to Vestal Grade School. It was an oasis. It was an oasis. Well, your point is well taken. We need to be able to make sure that all this electrification that we're working on, not just an issue of being able to recharge the batteries, but how the electricity gets to us in the first place. And we are all committed to making sure that that electricity is produced sustainably with renewables. And as you know, and as you referenced, sometimes there's a challenge getting the renewable energy in the area that it's produced with wind and solar, particularly to metropolitan areas where the demand is greater. There are resources to build additional transmission capacity, and there's a tax credit for energy transmission in the Build Back Better. We need to have a stronger, more diverse grid, and we need to make sure that it is built in a way that enhances the decarbonization of our infrastructure. But there are resources in there that would help advance that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Andrew Crosby, you're up.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, hi, Congressman. I'm sorry I'm late to this meeting, and maybe you've already touched on this. But my question was about the fact that we've lost so much forest in Oregon with the recent wildfires. I was recently in Eagle Creek and witnessing the devastation that occurred in the gorge. And yet I'm seeing log truck after log truck full on the highways. And it seems like the Forest Service is, really trying to get out the cut. And that just seems really ironic that we're continuing aggressive forestry practices and clear cutting while we're losing forests due to wildfire. And ironically, we're also continuing to allow campfires, which are a cause of forest fires, and also fireworks, which are legalized to an extent in Oregon and also up in Washington. So the first part of my question is, what is in the works to get a handle on some of these practices as we're losing our forests, which of course is driving increased climate change and are reducing our resilience. And also, I live in I guess you would call a historically underserved neighborhood in Portland, and our street trees are few and far between. Is there money out there available for urban reforestation, particularly in some of these underserved neighborhoods where the trees serve so many purposes? So
Great. Well, we did touch on some of this a little earlier. There was a question about forest policy, but to your point, what I had said earlier is that I think one of the most important things we can do in our fight against climate change is to have a reset of forest policies. in terms of how we fight against disasters, wildfires and forest fires, being able to promote forest health and a more rational approach to dealing with fire management, not fire suppression. Allowing nature to be able to take its course in terms of the forest fires and grass fires being a part of the natural cycle. But that doesn't work if we alter the natural cycle, if we disrupt it. I think that is one of the most important things we can do in terms of strengthening land use protections for our forests, for our grasslands, and having policies for the recovery from disasters that employ natural forces, being able to have healthy forests, fight against things like clear cuts or disrupt dramatically the forest ecosystem, fighting against deforestation for internationally for soy and palm oil, and here at home. A healthy forest is more fire resilient. You may have listened this morning to a feature on NPR that talked about the giant sequoias that have bark a foot thick. Fire has been a natural part of their history for, in some cases, thousands of years. But when we disrupt it, and it is intense in terms of inappropriate fire suppression, inappropriate land use, we end up making it less stable. I think it's past time to have a reset in terms of forest policy and a much, much, much more aggressive land use. I had mentioned, I think it's past time. You're right. We have it's illegal to set off fireworks, but it's not enforced very effectively. But there are a whole host of other things that put us at risk. Just building homes in the flame zone where they shouldn't be increases the likelihood that people will start fires and that they are more vulnerable, and it misallocates firefighting resources. So I hope that we are going to be aggressive, not just in terms of disaster and carbon policies, but have a reset in terms of how important land use is going to be to protect these precious resources, and how forest health is one of the most powerful tools we have to fight climate change and global warming.
And if I may, how do you see us going about achieving that reset that you're talking about? Seems like there are pretty strong forces aligned against that reset, and a big push to liquidate a lot of the forests right now. Kind of get it while you can. How do we reset forest policy in the way you're talking about?
Well, I have been pleased working with some of the people in the Biden administration. I think they understand that. Strengthening our land use policies. Part of it here in Oregon, there are issues that we can deal with in our own state. It doesn't have to rely on the federal government. We've got some challenges about how we administer things within our control. But part of it, I think, is some forest evangelical work. Let people understand the power of a healthy forest. Have people understand the vulnerability when we disrupt the ecosystems, when we reduce the canopy, whether it's in wild areas or in urban settings. Being able to have urban forestry and appropriate vegetation is important for our being able to fight the impact of the heat domes. And I think we are seeing people starting to understand how essential that is. And these are things we can do literally in our own backyard.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Betty McArdle.
Hello, Congressman Blumenauer. It's been a while.
I've been waiting to hear from you here, Betty.
I go by she, her. And if I gave you all my affiliations, it would be the rest of the hour. But the most important, and what's happening right now, is I'm on the board of my neighborhood association. So I take all of this very seriously. You know, everything in the bill is very important, but it is likely that Democrats will have to let some sections go in order to be able to pass something. And to me, the parts of the bill addressing climate change are the most important to put into effect. What might the Democrats have to let go in order to get climate change items passed?
Well, Betty, as usual, you're cutting to the chase with a very profound observation. You've been around this business for a long time and you understand the give and take of politics. And when we're dealing with a Senate that is 50-50, and one of the 50 on our side is Joe Manchin, it's not a clear, steady path forward. But I will say that I agree with you that the climate provisions are the most important, that we are in a climate crisis and we've experienced it here in the Northwest. And over the last 6 months, it's global. It is global, things we've never seen before. So I think part of what's important is for us to drive those points home, how personal it is. Hundreds of people who died in the Pacific Northwest because of the extreme heat, what it's doing to our forests, what it's doing to water supplies in the Northwest, in the Colorado Basin, the lowest that it's been since the dams were constructed. This is coming home to people in very real terms. So I have placed the highest priority in protecting these provisions. But I think that there is an opportunity for us to really beat the drum on this. I think people are more sensitive to it and they're starting to see the interconnections. I am not eager to start retreating. I think it's these things that we've been talking about here are very important, including elements that we haven't really discussed in terms of the human infrastructure. The fact that there are 65 million checks that are going out this month for poor and lower income children in this country that will end up reduced for the third consecutive month, and it'll continue all the rest of the year. And we're fighting to try and make those, if not permanent, at least to extend them. But these are things that are popular with the public, and these are things that relate to how interconnected we are. Something that you appreciate both in terms of your neighborhood activism and your longtime work with the environment. These are all part of a broader pattern, and we must fight to protect the broader pattern. But for me, the climate provisions are the most important, and I think we're in very good shape to be able to retain them.
Yes, good. Glad to hear that. Thank you, Congressman.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
That's my very insightful question, Betty. Up next, we have Tom Kelly.
My camera seems to be in the.
We had a good shot of your elbow, Tom.
Well, you know, I'll try to exercise that elbow more so it looks better.
Swinging a hammer, that'll do it.
That's right. Well, I'm glad we're talking about the climate aspects of this because my question has to do with solar tax credits. And what I understand is there's provisions that will reset the tax credit back to 30%. And that will also see a long-term extension. I think you know that Neil Kelly, my business is has a solar division. We have about 18 employees in that division, and those jobs and the jobs of the solar industry in Oregon are really important. But the impact that we can have on climate in Oregon and in the United States in the solar industry is important. So I'd love to hear about what the status of that might be.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks for your important work on this and your advocacy. as a business person, you've been able, I think, to help move the needle a little bit with some skeptics. And that essentially is why we've worked so hard to extend the PTC and the investment tax credit for a 10-year period before it starts to phase out. It's why I've been fighting to make sure that we have the ability to be able to fund the tax credit direct pay, not having to go through convoluted business transactions. I mean, you've seen this in the past where they get pretty complicated to be able to harvest the tax credit. Well, with the direct payment, we don't have to do that. The direct payment puts this in the hands of the solar or wind provider and the beneficiary. They don't have to have the leakage to, get a cigarette company to, buy the tax credit at a discount. This gives the full benefit to the public as a result of this. We're working to make sure that we've got equality between solar and wind. There's no benefit, I think, to be able to have different timetables. It's confusing. It's an unnecessary political complication. We true it up. And the combination of doing that and having the direct pay, I think, is going to be really a game changer for this next decade when we desperately need it.
Thank you, Congressman.
Oh, thanks for your important work.
I'd echo that, Tom. Thank you. Nora Apter, you're up next.
Hi, Congressman. Nice to see you. I had the pleasure of working with your team for many years on environmental policy on the Hill, and am now the climate program director for the Oregon Environmental Council. Speaking to you from my home in the Montevilla neighborhood. I first want to echo everybody else's thanks for your...
Great.
Oh, thank you. I want to echo everyone else's thanks for your leadership on the Build Back Better budget, which this conversation has just underscored what an opportunity this budget poses for our climate and jobs and justice. And I'm just hoping you could talk about how these types of federal investments in clean energy jobs and climate smart infrastructure will benefit everyday Oregonians and workers. And in particular, I'm interested in what a just transition to a clean energy economy looks like to you.
Well, that's a very important consideration. We understand that there are people who are, let us say, invested economically and psychologically in the economy of the past. And we need to be sensitive to that. But as a practical matter, as you well know, doing this right has more economic opportunities and on a more sustainable basis. I feel very strongly that we need to do a better job to explain how these pieces fit together. And one of the reasons that we're working on, for example, on the tax credits, the direct pay, why I am working on a response to disaster reaction. I mean, these are things that can happen right now. They don't have to wait 10 years or 5 years. They will make a difference in 5 months. We're going to spend a lot of money helping people recover from the latest round of disasters. One of the things I'm committed to doing is to try and invest that recovery money better. Be clear with the public. You know, there are programs right now. I had the flood insurance program to try and stop repetitive flood damage. There are people that get hundreds of thousands of dollars of flood payments for structures that are worth less than $100,000. But being able to be clear that we're better off with the investments that we're making towards sustainability. Don't put people back in harm's way. do not allow mixed messages. The federal government right now is spending some money trying to move people out of floodplains to avoid repetitive flood damage. At the same time, HUD is relocating people right back in the same situation. We're working against each other. We ought to insist that we have full disclosure about the flood risks that people face for any federal program. There are simple common sense steps that I think we can take that will make people safer and send the right sort of signals. But we need to be sensitive to the fact that a number of people live in these areas of repetitive flood damage because it's the only affordable housing that is available to them. So that means we ought to be taking some of this disaster recovery money and investing it in safe, affordable housing. We had people drowned in New York City because they were living in illegal apartments that weren't according to any code. They weren't supposed to be there. And there was no appropriate escape when the floodwaters came rushing down. That's inexcusable. We need to make sure that we are not losing an opportunity to do a reset, that people understand the risks and that we are there to try and help protect them. We need to be sensitive to the fact that economics matter, and many people are driven to be in floodplains and dangerous living conditions because of discrimination and economics. And I think that is every bit as important to be able to invest in as just the cleanup, the immediate cleanup of the disaster. I really appreciate your observation.
Thank you, Congressman.
Congressman, you're always so generous with your time and availability. We have time for one last question, and that's from Janet Unruh. Oh, Janet, you might still be on mute. If you could unmute, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm clicking my way through all the options here. Thank you so much for having this meeting and for meeting with us, Congressman Blumenauer. And my question is on the local level, and I had heard recently that in our area here, the area that you represent, I'm in Wilkes East, that I believe there's a greenhouse gas inventory that has been done or it's in progress. Yeah. And as far as I know, it measures the greenhouse gases that are emitted through government vehicles and I don't know what else. And so anyway, I think it's a great first start. And certainly we have to quantify what our problems are before we can begin to really tackle them. And I wondered if you could talk about that. And I want to throw you a tremendous challenge, which would be to help think about how, if once we know what our greenhouse gas emissions are, how can we begin to compensate for them or to reduce them, things like that?
Well, being able to understand the scope of the problem is essential. You can't fix what you can't measure. And I think that is important. And I'm pleased that the state DEQ is evaluating gas emissions in Oregon as a lead agency for the state, that the governor's executive orders and the passage of the 100% clean energy for all bill in the legislature, the state is moving in this direction, both to act and to quantify. It has driven me crazy that the federal government has been stymied. You know, the agriculture sector is completely exempt from air and in many cases, water quality. Even though that's a major source of air and water pollution. It's why Des Moines has, I think, the largest water treatment plant in the country, if not the world, because of all the upstream pollution. And we have been much too lax about requiring, particularly the agricultural sector, but across the board, people to keep track of what they're doing, because that's the first step to be able to make the progress that we want. And then I don't think that we should exempt broad swaths of the economy from their responsibility in helping us reduce greenhouse gases. Air pollution, water pollution, they are much harder if we're going to carve out major sources of pollution. And it also makes it harder to get other people to be on board if they can see, well, this industry is not doing its part. These people get a pass. The more that we treat everybody the same, and it starts with the quantification and then working strategically, not being crazy about it, but being relentless to follow through. We're running out of time. This is the decade of decision. If we don't get this right this decade, we're not going to make it. Life as we know it for our children, our grandchildren, for some of us who will still be alive in 10 years, is going to be unrecognizable. So I hope that the sense of urgency that I'm feeling with the reconciliation package, and that is driving us to fight for everything we can get in that package, and the request I made to people on this call to spread the word. We don't need anybody to call Peter DeFazio or Jeff Merkley or Ron Wyden. You know, the Oregon delegation gets it. But there are people around the country that need to hear, with the missionary zeal that we have, about what difference this summer has made for us in terms of air quality, in terms of forest fires, in terms of the risk that we're going to be facing in how we respond to drought. I think we can help make this real, and making it real with a personal connection, I think, is key to our progress.
Congressman, that was a very inspiring answer. Thank you. Thank you, Janet, for your question. Congressman, thank you again so much for your time. We've learned a lot through this, and we want to turn you loose to make sure you can go back to doing good work on our behalf and on behalf of the environment. Any final things you'd like to say before we let you go?
Well, Jules, I think having conversations like this, hearing questions and comments, and reinforcing our partnership is an important part of what I do. People on this call, some of whom I've known for years, are part of what keeps me going. Sometimes I will tell you, in Washington, D.C., dealing with some of these climate deniers and insurrectionists, it gets a little tiring. But being connected with people that I represent here in Oregon, who have the zeal and the passion, and who've been part of many pioneering efforts that we've done in Oregon over the course of the last half century, making a huge difference. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation. I urge people to think about sharing the word with people they know across the country, and then continue that each of us does what little bits we can do, because the climate crisis we face is the result of billions of individual decisions we all make every day. And our making decisions, when we take a bike ride instead of a car, when we think thoughtfully about the food choices that we make, how we employ energy in the built environment, in our own personal situation. These are a critical part of the solution, and I appreciate you all being a part of it.
Thank you, Congressman. We look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Jules.
Thanks. All right, well, next up, Tia is going to share a few things with us. Tia?
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Congressman Blumenauer. And thank you all for joining us today. Congress is taking on a lot of incredibly important work right now, and it's really exciting to hear from Oregon's champions who are working to ensure that the Build Back Better Act and other acts include climate action and environmental justice policies that we so need right now. It's also really important that Congress hears from us, their constituents, about our priorities, even if it's just to thank them for their work. On that note, I have two great things that you can do right away. First, please like OLCV's Facebook post and add a comment to thank Congressman Blumenauer for spending his time with us today and for his climate leadership. The link to our post is going to go in the chat in a moment, so please head there right now to add your thanks. We also have posts up on our Instagram and Twitter too, if you're active on those platforms. Secondly, the best thing that you can do at this stage in the process is write a letter to the editor, an LTE. These are short 100 to 300 word opinion pieces where you can share your thoughts with your community and even the whole state, and they help demonstrate broad public support for bold climate action and can help champions like Congressman Blumenauer convince their colleagues across the country and here in Oregon that Congress needs to prioritize clean energy, justice, and jobs in the Build Back Better Act. And I think we all know that we can't let this once in a decade opportunity, once in a generation opportunity pass us by. OLCV has put together an LTE toolkit that you can use to help guide you, and our organizing team, including Adam, Brittany, and I, are happy to help with editing, proofreading, answering questions, anything that you need. The toolkit will also be put in the chat in a moment, and we will also share it in a follow-up email, so keep an eye out for that. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have any questions. Thanks again for attending our climate town hall with Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Back to you, Jules.
Thank you, Tia. Well said. And thank you to all of you. Oregon League of Conservation Voters could not do the work that we do without our committed volunteers, a committed community that has come together to advance pro-environment policies, hold elected leaders accountable, and support elected leaders who do the work of having a clean environment for Oregon. So thank you all so much. It's an honor to be with you all, and we look forward to the next conversation. Take care. Have a great weekend.